Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Hilary Fox, and I am co-chair of the TIPS Law Practice Management Task Force. And you've joined us today for another installment of our fabulous Lunch and Learn series. And I am joined today by three fantastic panelists, and we're going to talk about bringing your full self to work and building inclusive teams. With me today, we have Akira Heshiki, who is a senior director and assistant counsel with the Standard Insurance, and she's out of Portland, Oregon. We got Hasson Barnes, who's the owner of the law office of Hasson Barnes in Baltimore, Maryland. And Tamara Tomomitsu, partner at Borden, Ladner and Gervais in Toronto. So we have a great program today. Please do put your questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer those as we go. We'll kind of see how time ends up with it. We will leave some time for questions at the end as well. And we'd like to thank the Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, which Hasson is the chair of, for co-sponsoring this webinar today. So let's dive in. This is what we're going to go through. Talk about what psychological safety is, consequences of not having it, how you determine if you have it or not, how to build it. Talk about different settings. We're fortunate today we have an in-house person, a large firm person, and a small firm person. So hopefully we can kind of catch the environment that applies to you. And Akira put together some great resources that we will share at the end. And that's us. I should note I have a fantastic co-chair to this task force, Rich Williamson, but he unfortunately was unable to join us today, so we'll miss him. All right, Miss Akira, we're going to start with you. What is psychological safety?
Thanks, Hilary. Thank you, everyone who is interested enough to join us on this topic today. Just as for full disclosure, and so you don't think I'm plagiarizing, the materials we're presenting today draw heavily on the work of Amy Edmondson of the Harvard Business School. She's the one that coined the term psychological safety. And really what it is a shared belief held by people on a team that it's okay to go ahead and express your ideas and your concerns, and that you can make mistakes without fear of getting punished. So shorthand is really team trust. And what I really want to stress about the definition here is it's not about just having a nice environment where nobody is allowed to make anyone feel uncomfortable. It's actually the opposite of the definition of psychological safety. It's really making sure that you have built an environment of trust to allow people to make mistakes, to feel vulnerable, and know that they're in a safe environment so problems can be addressed right up front, and that you can work through disagreements together, because we all know that having a disagreement-free workplace is not actually a reality. So that's kind of the basis of what we're talking about here today. And next slide. So why is psychological safety important? So according to the research, a workplace with psychological safety is going to be one that enhances the motivation and engagement of your team, where the members of the team really feel like, hey, I know what I'm doing, and what I'm doing really matters. It supports the goals of the organization. Psychological safety really enhances decision-making, because you've got a bunch of people bringing the best ideas to the table. In an environment where there's a lack of psychological safety, people may be holding back, and you may not be getting those great ideas. So in places where innovation is important, where your problem solving is really important to the work you do, this is really critical. And then finally, one of the best things about having a place with psychological safety is that in environments where people can feel like, oh, you know what, that might not work, then we can course correct. We can make those changes and perhaps minimize the risk of any mistakes that are made.
Awesome, thank you. Tamara, what do you think happens if we don't establish an environment like this?
So thanks, Hilary, and I'm happy to be here, and thanks to everybody who joined us today. Um, Anybody who knows me well knows that I beat the drum on this all the time. Retention, retention, retention. We don't move forward as a profession unless we can retain the talent that we have. And recruitment's important, but if you can't retain those that you've recruited, um, we're no better off than we were to really begin with. So when you have a situation where people feel like they're under stress all the time, where they feel like they can't make mistakes, where they feel like their voice isn't valued, it can lead, not surprisingly, to people leaving. And I heard this the other day. It's not within the legal context, but a podcast, and Rob Lowe was on it, and he was talking about his time on the West Wing and how people would say to him all the time, "Oh, well, it must be great being on the West Wing, and you must be having the best time." And he said he did not. He did not have that experience. He felt undervalued, and he eventually left. I always wondered why he left, but now I know. So, retention is a big issue. Performance is another area of concern. When we're under stress and we're anxious all the time, we have difficulty focusing, we have difficulty concentrating and being efficient, and we all want to be working at our optimal peaks. So, the better people feel about where they are and that ability to make mistakes without fear of any type of retribution, our performance is better. And then lastly, it's no big surprise that stress and anxiety can have a negative impact on our well-being, and it can manifest in so many ways. And I think people automatically kind of go to the mental health um, perspective, but it can also manifest in physical conditions. I think we've all probably anecdotally heard people say he stressed himself right into an ulcer or stressed herself right into an ulcer. So um, we can't bring our best selves to work if we're not at a good place physically and mentally, and not having a safe work environment can have those negative impacts. And just the last thing that I'll say on this piece is that, we'd like to think that we're all self-aware enough that we're looking at this and it's the right thing to do, and we're all good people. But I know that sometimes we hear while we run a business. So if you run into that, I mean, it speaks for itself here, right? When you can't retain, you're losing the time, the money that you spent on training people. We literally work in a business where time is money. So if we're not working at our optimal best, then we're stressing the workplace that way. And then if you have somebody that needs to take a leave because they're not well, because the environment's not great, then you have to find people to step in and take over that work. So to the extent that you ever find yourself in that seat and people are asking you to make the business case for it, I think it kind of speaks for itself.
I agree. Thanks. Hassan, do you want to talk about an example from NASA?
Yeah, thank you, Hilary, and thank you for people who are observing this. And I guess the issue and the idea is psychological well-being is important across the board. We're lawyers here, so we see things in a legal standpoint, but all through business, we see examples of there being a lack of support for people's psychological needs. Akira mentioned Amy Edmonds' book in her work. She used the Challenger or the Columbia, pardon me, disaster back in 2003 as an example. You guys may know, I'm certain you remember when you were a young person, there was a huge tragedy where Columbia on reentry fell apart. The probe of the shuttle actually collapsed under stress of reentry. The reality was there was an issue with foam debris falling off of the shuttles, and it had been happened for every shuttle prior to Columbia. NASA knew it was a problem. The people, engineers knew it was a problem, but the desire to want to keep shuttles operating, to keep the space program going forward, they downgraded it from being a very serious problem to just being a serious problem. And as a result, they allowed conditions to continue to exist, which ultimately led to the Columbia shuttle disaster. You would assume that in a place like NASA, there would be pressure on getting things right all the time. And it was, but it was a competing pressure on moving the program along. And because of that, people, based on Ms. Edmonds' reasoning and based on her research, people pull back on their desire to be right with their desire to fit the mission to get things going forward. So they didn't they weren't as vigilant with preventing foam breakage. They weren't. So initially what happened is a piece of foam broke off the shuttle and hit one of the wings when it took off. So on reentry, the wing wasn't able to sustain the heat and the force of reentry. They should have known that, and they did know that. Sometimes even the law firms or even other businesses, when your employees feel that they want to move with the company, they want to get things right, they do things or ignore things they should pay attention to. So for me, as an attorney, it may be an associate not doing discovery properly and not fully getting full answers because they know we have to get it submitted versus following through the process. The Columbia space shuttle disaster was a huge example of that. It may be hard to see the difference or see the comparison, but it's there. When you look at your past success and you look at the company's overall mission and goal, you have to make sure people are on the same page and that you can't put bigger missions ahead of what's important. Quite often, we don't think about our employees' mental state, how they see things, how they interact, and how they understand things in any real way. And the Columbia disaster was a good example of that as to what not to do. There were numerous investigations. There were numerous agencies involved. And the final idea was it was an error that should have been prevented. And it wasn't because people wanted to make sure NASA went forward and the shuttle went to space.
It's a fantastic example. Thank you. So I want to ask all three of you, and actually maybe we'll just start with you, Hasson, since you have the floor. And you mentioned a little bit about, an example with associates at your firm, but how do you go about assessing how your team is doing? What steps do you take and what observations do you make sure to, try to uncover?
Well, luckily for us, I mean, we have a small team. I'm a small firm. We typically have between 2 and 3 lawyers at the firm. We have office staff. So we see each other all the time. I see their work all the time. We talk about cases together all the time. I'm able, and I also check in with my staff on a regular basis. We have things such as weekly meetings whereby we are able to go over and outline and highlight successes and failures as a team. So we all can see. So whether it's the paralegal, whether it's the law clerk or the associate, if one person is telling a story about their success or failures, we all hear it. So we all know the standard for the company. That's been one way that I find has been successful in helping people realize what we should or shouldn't do. In terms of psychological safety, because of that, we talk in private as well. So we have weekly meetings with the staff and individual meetings to go over issues people may have. It seemed like a lot, but the reality is people have issues all the time. Employees have concerns and fears and pressures that you may not put on them as a supervisor, but they feel those pressures. So we check in quite often to verify what people's issues are. And I have an open door policy. No, that doesn't mean people don't sometimes feel they can't come to me, but I do put things in place to make sure people feel heard, they feel welcome, they feel understood. And we also put things in place. When I was a younger person, we didn't have like mental health days. When I first started working, there was no mental health days. It was you go to work. More recently, we do have mental health days, and we do take time for people. If you're not feeling well, that's an option for people to take, just because we want you to be well, not only physically, but mentally. So those are some of the ways we work at making sure people are in a good place, and we work at identifying whether people are in a good place.
Fantastic. Tamara, how about you? How do you go about making sure that, for example, from this list, that your team members know that they can come to you if, they made a mistake or they don't know an answer?
I always, I start whenever I work with somebody new, I always start with all mistakes can be rectified except for limitation periods. And even then, sometimes those can be rectified. So, I'd rather you come and talk to me about a mistake you've made rather than hold it in, because nothing good comes from leaving a mistake aside, right? It will turn bad. It will just not work out well. So encourage people, my team members, when something goes wrong, to come and talk to me about it. And I hope that, I foster a comfortable enough environment that they feel comfortable coming and talking to me. And, I seek feedback from them as well. So as much as I give them feedback, I always ask, what can I be doing better? Is there something that I'm not doing that I could be doing that would be more helpful? More meetings, less meetings. Something that I've tried to do is, even if I'm working late at night and I'm trying to get something off my desk, we have a delayed delivery option on our email. So I don't send them an email at 1 o'clock in the morning and freak them out. I put it to, 10 o'clock. I also don't put things to 9 o'clock because nobody wants an email from a partner at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I'm mindful of those types of things, and I reinforce the fact that we all learn better from our mistakes than we do from our successes. So, I hope that I'm fostering an environment where people feel like they can come and talk to me about things. And then the last thing is, sometimes people come and speak to you about other people and other experiences they've had. I do not take it upon myself just to go speak to that person and blow it up. What I will say is, do you want me to speak to that person? I'm happy to do that for you, but I'm not going to do it if you don't feel comfortable with me doing that. And a lot of times I say, you know what, I just wanted somebody to speak to. And sometimes they do want you to speak to that person. So then I'll go speak to that person. And sometimes it's, it's not just internal, it can be external as well. They've had a difficult conversation with another lawyer. And I think, it's just important that your team members understand and appreciate that you have your back, you have their back. And that's, really what I try and do every day. I hope it works.
No, I like that, and I agree with that approach. Me personally, managing my team, I always say I'm happy to play bad cop if you want that and need that, but I don't want to just insert myself necessarily if I'm just gonna make it worse. So, but yeah, letting them know that, I do have their back, I think does help. Akira, what do you think? How do you handle these
Well, I'm
matters?
fortunate to work in an organization that surveys all of our employees using a lot of these similar questions. So I do have a way of getting this feedback in an anonymous way from my team. So I get a report card. But the other informal way, I would say, sounds a lot like what Tamara does. Is those conversations I have with members of my team during one-on-ones. I have two great examples that came up this week that made me feel like I was on the right track. One, a lawyer came to me and said, hey, I just need to give you a heads up because this might be a problem that another leader, had some concerns about, and I just want you to know so you're not surprised. And today I got a follow-up email like, oh, it turned out it was okay. We got details and blah, blah, blah. But the fact that she was able to preview that for me and feel safe enough to do that and be vulnerable and bringing up her concerns that, oh, this may not make us look all that great. That made me feel really good about the environment I'm creating for her to feel safe enough to bring that to my attention. And the second one's a little bit harder. I just got off a one-on-one earlier this morning with a member of my team who said, I worked to get this contract out the door and I was on death's door. And, we had to have a candid conversation. Like, it's not my expectation for you to be working while you're, battling health issues. Because she was like, I was impaired and I felt, am I malpracticing? And I said that, what can I do to make it clear, make it safe for you to raise your hand and say, I'm not going to get this done this week. It's not possible. And we had talked a little bit about the expectations of the customers and what they really wanted. They were holding meetings without her and she was feeling, like she couldn't skip out on those meetings, and at that point, that's something that I should be aware enough to go, hey, you need a lawyer to participate and this isn't going to happen this week. It's just not.
Right.
But, constant feedback, kind of like Tamara said, what can I do better? What can I do different to support you? I think is one of the keys to creating a psychologically safe team.
Right. You raise a good point, Akira, in that oftentimes our team members put things out there, and it's not, it's out of whatever. Lawyers have a certain personality type or childhood trauma or whatever, but she's feeling like the expectations are higher than they really are, but you don't know that. So I think it is, that's a great example of how frequent communication, really taking the effort to get to know the people that work with you and kind of know who's more susceptible to being too hard on themselves so that you can intervene. So
yeah, we ended up creating, I said, let's just do an experiment for next week. You log on at 8, you log off at 4. I'm going to check to make sure you're not logged on after 4. And then we'll check in next week and see how you feel and if that makes a difference. So I think there's creative ways to do it, but definitely the communication, which I think we're going to get to in a little bit, is a key part of that. Which is this slide. So I think the next area that we're going to talk a little bit about are how do you build the psychological safety? Yeah.
Yes. So what do you think, Akira?
So I think you already said, you spilled the beans in terms of really explicit communication. And there's things that, especially in a hybrid situation, which make it a little bit more difficult. For example, on my team, we have a system where all the questions coming into legal team come into one singular queue. That's one way we get work. And then the nature of the work is that some people just pick up the phone and contact my team directly. And that leads to not all team members being able to see all the work that's being done by all of the team. So team looks together every day at all the questions coming in and kind of goes, I'll take this one, I'll take this one. And then I've got a team member who's like, well, I just took some offline and nobody else can see those, but I don't want the rest of my team to think that I'm not doing my work. And it was really causing some morale issues. So we developed a secondary board where now, everyone lists those work projects that come outside of the queue. But the point is, I wouldn't have known, right, that people were feeling like, oh, that person never picks up any questions, or that person, is just too slow, or whatever it is, without having that communication. And really talking that through as a team was very important. The other thing I have on here is be aware of nonverbal cues. And again, I have an example where I was in a meeting and somebody said something, and I kind of sat back, and the feedback I got from that was, well, Kira was just not, she didn't like that idea. She was asking for feedback, but her body language was clearly going the opposite way. And, I had to have a whole conversation around, what was going on with me at the moment. But it really showed me, like I still have a ton of things to work on, even though I think I'm a fairly empathetic person, that people read off of things. And so without saying things explicitly, without actually saying all the words and not assuming that people understand where you're coming from, or because we're friends that they're going to give you a pass, that you really have to be very clear about the expectations. And so building a safe environment is really part of that.
If I can jump in for a second, I like that idea. One of the things at a smaller firm, we have certainly requirements for billable hours, we have requirements for work duties. I found it helpful to be very transparent as to what I expect from my employees. So we may have billable hours requirements, but we also have quality control requirements that even though your billables are great, if you're losing cases and you're not presenting yourself the way you need to, that's also a problem. So yes, we've been very transparent, and I found that to be helpful. Some people may have imposter syndrome, and you have to deal with those kind of issues, but it's good to know they have it and to address it so that we can give them more support. I had an associate at time in the past that they felt they weren't able and capable of representing clients. Of course they weren't. It was their own self-talk, but to address it head on. And what that meant was we can do a run through of a trial. We can go in the conference room. You can have your oral arguments ready. I'm gonna sit down like a judge, and and that helped that person get better at being in court. I did more hearings where I showed up in court and watched them and gave them feedback after their trials, which turned their view of themselves and their ability to litigate cases around, and they were able to work much more effectively. So sometimes it takes, as a leader, just jumping in and being more directive and being willing to ask the questions so that you can give a real answer.
I love that. I think that's exactly right. And while you have the floor, Hasson, how do you go about kind of modeling this for your team?
Moving to the next slide. So, one, although I like telling people I'm the best lawyer in the world, and my staff has heard me say that many times, it's not true. Unfortunately, I do have areas where I'm not the greatest, and I'm transparent about it. When we meet in our weekly meetings to talk about things we've done, I talk about my successes and failures as well. I'm not different than the other people on staff. The lawyers hear it, the paralegals hear it. If I had a bad day in court and it was my fault, everyone's gonna know about it because to me, it's a learning experience. But I do that also to build some rapport with my staff. So it's not that I'm up here and you guys are down here. No, we all do the same work, different aspects depending on what your job is. But there has to be some recognition that even if you make mistakes, we're still willing to go forward and work together. The goal is to make sure people can trust you as an attorney and as their boss. So I think I do a pretty good job of that. I'm sure I can do better at it, but it's part of being a leader. It's not only that you can tell the people, oh, I've been practicing for 25 years, I know this and I know that. I did great in court, is also showing them how you practice and how you operate and how they can get better as well.
Yep. You kind of, as the leader, have to check your ego a little bit. Early in my management career, I definitely struggled with, being authentic and vulnerable because I felt like, there was this sense that I was maybe a little young to have moved in that position. So I just felt like I had to be like, know everything and can't show any struggles. But your team sees through that. So I've really learned to check myself over the years and tell people, yeah, I've struggled. My inbox has had, 1,000 unread emails in it. And this is how I worked through that. Just, I'm not perfect. I'm a work in progress, just like everyone else. And this is something that worked for me. Maybe you want to try that or a variation of it for, issue X, Y, or Z, and just kind of show them that you're a real person and it's okay to be a real person and, not do everything perfectly every minute of the day. Tamara, what do you think?
We moved on to the next slide, or are we still talking about
Yes.
the last one, or maybe
Next
a
slide.
bit of both?
Yeah.
There are some, I think, good points here on building psychological safety in the workplace. I think, and this goes back to an earlier slide, I do think communication and transparency is just so important, right? Especially for young lawyers or non-lawyers. I'm at the stage of my career now where I have a certain amount of agency, and I things don't go right. I have the experience to say, okay, I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. It's not the end of the world, right? Like, this isn't going to make or break anything. We'll figure it out. I appreciate that not everybody feels like they have that agency. And so for me, it's really important when I'm working with my team members, and I had this morning, this came up this morning. Some of our clients are on quarterly billing, and I was going through a bill, and I thought the time with one of my law clerks was high. And I was trying to figure out how much to write down. I knew I was going to write down a certain amount, but I didn't know how much. So I asked her to come into my office, and I said, I just want to have a discussion with you about a bill. Please don't think I think you've done anything wrong. Your work quality was excellent. But I've looked at the bill. Let's go through it together. I showed her what the bill looked like because I appreciate and understand that she doesn't do billing. She's just docketing, and that she might not know how much time she's docketed at the end of the day. So I said, this is how much time you docketed at the end of the day. She's like, oh. And I said, okay, like, let's talk through that. Was there a reason for it? Was something going on? Were you kind of moving between a couple files? Like, help me understand. And we talked through it, and we ended up on a number that I was going to write down. And I said to her, listen, if I'm writing down a half an hour, I'm not going to call you in my office every single time. But I said, I just want you to recognize and understand that if I'm going to write down any kind of what I consider to be significant amount of time, I want to have the discussion with you, because I want you to be able to explain to me if something, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing the number. I don't know everything you went through to get to that number. So, let's have a discussion about it. Maybe I feel differently about it at the end of the day, and maybe I don't write down as much. And I said, I don't want you to think that you've done anything wrong, right? It's not about right or wrong. It's just about what I think the client can bear. So I just think it's always important to be transparent, because if people get, their stats at the end of the year and they say, oh, Tamara wrote down X number of hours of my time, I know what the automatic reaction is. I've done something wrong, right? Because that's what I would think. Holy crap, I've done something wrong. Either my work product isn't good enough, or I spent way too much time, or she thinks I'm stupid, or whatever it is, because I thought that as a young lawyer. I don't know how many times I come home to my husband and say, I'm going to get fired because so-and-so thinks I'm stupid. Right? And he's like, you're not stupid. I'm like, well, I feel stupid. So I know that that's like a reaction they're going to have. So I want to have that conversation with them first, so they feel safe enough, that when they get their stats at the end of the year, they understand why I've done what I've done. And if they have a problem in the future, that they can come and talk to me. Maybe the next time they have a file and they think, this is going to be a lot, they'll come and say, Tamara, I'm going through this. It's a lot. I want you to be aware up front. Maybe we can talk about what might be a reasonable amount of time. We have those conversations ahead of time. But I think you can only have those types of conversations if you're building a certain element of trust with your team members.
Right. Before we move on, do any of the three of you have any comments on how this changes or has to flex if you have any kind of hybrid work situation going on in your organization? Do you have to handle this, call out to people differently if you don't physically see them every day?
I think you do, just in terms of how you practice. I know for a while we had people working after COVID. It was partially hybrid. They were in the office some days and away some days. But then when the court schedule came, it wasn't always clear who was here when, whether they was in court all day or whether they were working from home. But it did change on my end, what needed to happen for me to take time to recognize what's going on, because people are in and out so much more and more frequently. And having dialogue on the phone or via Zoom is different than face-to-face. And I'm an old school person. I like face-to-face meetings. I like team meetings. I like staff meetings face-to-face. I think it's more impactful. You can see the look on person's face. They can see the look on my face. They can hear the timbre in my voice. That's not as common, because I know at bigger firms, certainly, there may be people in other states or other countries. For me, a small firm, the hybrid changed the schedule and when people meet, but we still work towards in person, because I felt like it was clear goals. Now, we put things in writing as well. We send the emails to staff and say, here are your objectives, here are your standards. Although we all read the same language and we understand what words mean, somehow in writing, people don't always understand and glean your actual intention. So emails are horrible, texts are horrible. Being face-to-face so you can say something, they can say, what you mean by that, has always been a better option for me. So we do both. We do writing, which is good for people who are virtual, but when they come in, we do follow-up. The reality is, we are litigators. I spend a good amount of time dealing with clients and dealing with staff and the staff issues, and staff concerns and staff safety. It's because in order for us to run smoothly and efficiently, they have to be feeling good about the job they do and being here at work.
So good.
Yeah.
Good. Go ahead, Akira.
Oh, I was just going to add, my organization is 100% remote, and I have people all across the country that report up to me. So really having that participation and team environment it's a little bit of a challenge, but it has to be very intentional. So my team huddles 4 times a week. We meet at least 5 times a week. And then the way we do our business as a team is constant collaboration. So I am bringing on a new attorney, hopefully, knock on wood, in the next month. And, during the interview process, I said, there isn't going to be a time when you're just by yourself, heads down in your house and not hear from anybody. That will never happen in our organization, because we are constantly checking in. I'm going to be, having, in addition to our one-on-ones, you're going to be asked how you're doing every single day that we can connect as a team. And you're going to be sharing out what you're working on and the challenges you have. That's an expectation. So that's one way that we do battle kind of the difficulty. We have expectations around, if you can, we'd like to have your camera on so people can really see your what you're looking like, and if you're making an expression, we want to be able to see it and not guess. And then the other thing is, I have been building in time, even though it's cheesy, for my team to really not do work together, right? So I think, Tamara, one of you might have mentioned that you have like non-work allowed meetings. We've been doing baby showers, we've been doing team games where we just goof around and give people a chance to connect, as humans rather than just as robot lawyers.
Right. Yeah, I think that was Tamara that has the fun, not fun necessarily, but like not work time. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, I established once a week 45 minutes for my team, so my clerks, my practice assistant, and anybody else who wanted to join us for that matter. So we had some clerks from other teams as well join us, and it's a strict no work zone. So we get on, what did you do on the weekend? During COVID, it wasn't much, but sometimes we, just talk about family, talk about what's going on, talk about how much you may hate masks. My hands are like drying out because I'm washing them all the time. But it was just a way to kind of get away from work and connect as human beings. And I think that's so important, because the more you know about the people that you work with, I think the more at ease you feel with people, the better the communication is. And something Hasson said, I think, is really important. Email does not convey tone.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you get an email or you send an email and you don't mean anything by it. It's just an email. And then the other person on the other end of the email is like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Right. So I think anytime you can, even if you're in a hybrid or fully remote situation, anytime you can pick up the phone and have a call with somebody, and even if you're leaving a voicemail message, your tone will kind of give away, this isn't, the end of the world, or it's just, we need to chat. I need to touch in with you about something. But I think that's a really important point that Hasson made.
Yeah, I agree. I too, like Akira, manage people that are hundreds of miles away, and my one-on-ones are mandatory camera on. I don't care if you didn't brush your hair. I don't care if you didn't put makeup on. I need you to turn on your camera, and obviously I'll do the same, because I need to be able to focus on your face. Because when I have a whole big group meeting, I can't watch everyone's little box and check my notes and all the things. So I really need that to be able to check in with my people meaningfully. And I've tried to model myself assuming positive intent, but with the like, I read your email wrong, or I inferred an intent you didn't mean, by just trying to stay, emotionally neutral and just say, I read it this way. Is that what you meant? And really try to not put people on the defensive, but just give them a chance to explain themselves further. And then we can, have a dialogue better. But I think it's up to us to, model that we want you to ask for clarity, but please don't just assume that they're trying to get you, or they're trying to throw you under the bus, or whatever the case may be. So it's a give and take for sure. Tamara, were you going to talk about some, how to maybe take special care with some historically marginalized populations?
Yeah, I think the best thing that, we can do, and it's certainly something that we strive to do here, is to ensure that EDI principles are embedded in everything that we do, right? The thought shouldn't be, oh, we've created this program, let's put in an EDI spin on it, or let's think about it from an EDI perspective. EDI should be included at the outset of anything and everything that we do, so it's embedded in our practices. And so, I think that just goes to help with the inclusivity piece. And something that I'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about the large firm setting, when we moved to our new offices, so we moved to these offices in 2016, we made a conscious decision that, and at first it took a little getting used to, but we have to swipe passes to get in between floors. The, I don't know what you call it, the panel that you swipe and touch to go where you're going is low. And it's low to accommodate people who may not be able-bodied, right? All of our washrooms are hands-free, again, to accommodate people who may not be able-bodied. But that's an example of when you are creating your workspace to think about EDI being at the forefront of that, as opposed to, oh, we've designed our workspace and maybe now people can kind of think about, is it inclusive? If you're thinking about that from the outset, it just creates a more inclusive workspace. And, I'm really proud of that at the end of the day, that I had no say in the design, so it wasn't me, but the people, in our firm that were making those considerations, I just think they're great.
Agree. Accessibility is something that, if that's not an issue personal to you, it's very easy to overlook. So that's awesome.
I'll take this one.
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead, Hassan. What do you do about
one of
getting
the,
your friends,
so
your
in addition
teammates
to,
out?
so one of the things you do, and I think that both Tamara and Akira give examples of meeting with their staff outside of work duties. We forget sometimes when you get busy that a person is more than just their physical body. Their emotional well-being is very important in how they show up. I know we started every quarter doing events. Like we've done we went sailing once in the harbor in Baltimore, which was pretty cool. We did archery. We went out to the woods and we had an archer come out and teach us how to do archery, which was pretty cool. We've done bowling. All those things are just done to build a team environment so people feel welcome and they feel like a family. I mean, the reality is we're still in person. You're here more than you are home. You see me or see your coworkers more than you see your spouse. I want to make sure that it's a loving and caring environment, not loving in terms of overly emotional, but that when you're here, you feel comfortable. You don't feel like it's awkward and weird and it's sterile. I'm much more concerned about work getting done than being sterile. So we do quarterly meetings and retreats and getaways that everyone can do just to keep a certain level of familiarity with the team outside of work. I find the team members enjoy that probably much more than I do. They seem to enjoy it much more than I do, and they're much more into it than I am. But I think it's helpful just to have the idea that we will do things outside of work is helpful, and it keeps people in a positive mind frame, even with the challenge of COVID. And so when COVID happened, many employers went from being all in person to being hybrid or to being virtual. Now that COVID has come in and is still here, but the court is back open, hearings are back in person. More lawyers in my firm certainly are much more in person more often. I think getting back to a normal schedule of seeing people and being around people and being in an environment. I know bigger firms may do celebration, they may do happy hours, they may do different things so people can feel like I can see my coworker other than a camera and in a real way. So we know each other in a more personal way. So I think that it helps with psychological well-being. It helps. I mean, certainly it's no one shot or one fix, but I think it's part of the bigger picture of your office. If you are working towards making sure people feel safe and valued and considered, there's another tool in a tool shed for you to use.
For sure. And Akira put a good point in the chat that obviously you have done a good job establishing psychological safety on your team if you feel comfortable giving them bows and arrows when you're around. So
I
good
do.
job.
I wasn't afraid. I wasn't nervous, even though a couple of arrows went past a little close, but I made it out okay.
Kudos to you.
Exactly. I'm sorry, guys. I've gotten off here somehow. Who wants to talk about showing your team that mistakes are not all that bad? It's okay to make one.
Yeah, I think we were all gonna just jump in here, and I may have already shared my failings earlier. One of the things that I shared was that we do surveys of how people are feeling, and the important piece after the survey is not just to have the data, but also to do something about it. Otherwise, people are just like, why are we just taking surveys for the point of taking surveys? So as difficult as it is, I try to model this behavior for my team by saying, hey, this is a score I got as your leader this year, and one of the things I heard may be something around, not feeling like I'm doing a good job coaching you for professional growth. So let's put a plan behind that. What can we do? I need your feedback as a team to help me figure out how to remedy that. And so really trying not to hide behind those things, but I want to give the team an ability to provide me with the feedback, and also for me to feel safe, not saying I'm going to be shot with bows and arrows if I'm not the greatest, right? Like I can only get better by getting that feedback and input.
Right.
I don't know,
Tamara,
whoever
oh, God.
thought it was a good idea. Like, I see liability everywhere. It's a hazard of the job that I do. But the first time we went axe throwing, I'm like, who thought it was a good idea to put axes in the hands of lawyers and include booze? Like, I just, I just thought this is
Fair
going to end
question.
badly. But I think it's for me, to be in this profession, whether you're a lawyer, you're working adjacent to a lawyer, resiliency is important, and you only become resilient when you learn from your mistakes. And I said a little bit earlier, like, yeah, maybe it would be all sunshine and roses if you went through your legal career and nothing bad ever happened to you. But the reality is, bad things are going to happen. Nobody wins every case. Nobody has the perfect deposition every day. Sometimes you have a witness and you've prepped them and you think they're going to say X, and then they go off script and say Y, and you're sitting there with your head in your hands thinking, I don't even understand what happened here. Right? So it's going to happen to everybody. And I think as soon as you establish that, not to, to borrow a phrase from my Peloton instructors, progress, not perfection. Nobody expects you to be perfect because nobody is perfect. So what I do expect of you is when a mistake happens, come and talk to me about it and we'll work through it together. I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm not going to yell at you, but we'll work through it together. I think that's really, really important. Working through things, having that open conversation. What do you think? What do you think you could have done differently here? I might have done this, but that's a really good observation that you made, and creating a dialogue as opposed to a parental child kind of relationship. That's not here. We're colleagues, and we have to learn to treat each other as colleagues.
Absolutely. Hasson, how do you feel like this is unique to firms of your size?
So small firms have unique advantages and disadvantages to bigger, larger firms, just because of the nature of the work we do. Now, some small firms are boutique and they do different work. My small firm is general practice, so we do litigation, and that means family, business litigation, some estate litigation, some criminal defense work. So our client base is broad and wide ranging. As a result, it's been times where we've had clients who have different cultural backgrounds than the lawyers who were staffed on their cases. And with that comes all kind of issues that we don't always assume. I've had multiple instances where I either had to fire a client or handle client myself. In the past, I've had female staff, whether it's been attorneys and or office staff, and sometimes how our clients communicated was inappropriate. It may have been inappropriate in a flirtatious way, or it may have been inappropriate in a cultural way. And it's my firm. I have to come in and step in. My employees can't be in a hostile work environment because of the clients. So in those situations, and I feel like because we're a smaller firm, we are much closer to our clients. We have much more closer interaction. I could be wrong on that, but that's my impression. And because of that, you can't have close interaction with a client who talks down to you. You can, it doesn't go well. It's not a good feeling to represent someone who speaks to you in a way because you're a woman. So we've had a situation where, again, we fired clients, or I've taken clients on myself that I didn't want to take on. I didn't want to do their cases, but we did them because I thought it was better for my staff not to have those cultural missteps, and handle that case in a way that was zealous and prudent. When we do the weekly staff meetings, it's helpful. And I do think, and certainly Akira indicated that they have weekly touch-ins 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, which is incredible. I couldn't find time to meet with my staff 5 times a week, but the fact that you guys can do it is helpful. But for us, the weekly staff meetings are probably our biggest strength, just because we can see each other face to face and we can address issues. If there's an issue a person has, they bring them up. They have no fear of telling me their discontent or displeasure or fear or concerns. And by bringing up in a bigger group, it's helpful for everyone to see what's going on and have different ideas and different feelings about the matter. But it's easier for me to address as well. So the good is that we can address it. The bad is we may have more nuanced issues than mid-size or bigger firms. But we have learned a lot from handling those experiences, myself as well as my staff. And we've learned how to handle clients going forward just because of all the number of issues we've had with the clients. And in addition to clients who may have a different cultural background, because we do family and some criminal, we may have clients that have different psychological impairments or differences, which we can't fire a client because they are conditioned. We have to find a way around it. And those have been interesting, educational for the staff and how to handle it in a way where you don't feel bad, you don't feel abused, and you can still represent a client in a reasonable way.
Absolutely. Tamara, how about your very large firm?
Yeah, so I mean, on any given day, we have about 700 lawyers, and we have 5 offices across Canada, plus our talent teams, our admin staff, and our business services staff. So we're big, and because of that, it can be difficult with regional differences, and where Canada's, we may not be the densest country, but we have a lot of land, so there's a lot of land between offices. It can be difficult to create that consistency. So what we've done is we've identified inclusive practices and then rolled them out in each office. So one of the pillars of that is mentorship. So in addition to the traditional partner, associate, student, mentee, mentor relationship, every student and every junior associate has an associate mentor, somebody that's senior to them but closer to their age and stage, so they may feel more comfortable speaking to them than to a partner. In addition to that, if you wish, you can have an affinity mentor. And I've been a partner mentor in the traditional sense and an affinity mentor. And the questions that I get in each role are very, very different. A lot of times I'm mentoring women that look like me. And the drinking issue always seems to come up. And, I don't drink, don't digest alcohol well, I get ill, I don't want to be laying on the floor in a professional setting, not so great. But again, I am experienced enough and I've been at my firm long enough that I don't feel awkward about it. I appreciate that a younger associate may not have that confidence. So we talk through those things. We also have a national director of diversity and inclusion, so people go and speak to her about any issues that they may have. And then we have a national diversity and inclusion council, which I chair. made up of members from each office, and we encourage our members to engage with their office colleagues, and then any issues that might be percolating or brought to the council as a whole, we discuss them in appropriate ways to address the concerns, and then we run it up the chain to management. So that's the mentorship piece. And then we have employee resource groups, what most people would call affinity groups. We call them action committees. So we have pride, we have race, indigenous, and abilities. And anybody can join those. You don't have to be a lawyer. Anybody can join those. And it gives you, I hope gives our firm members an additional place to have conversations with people that may fall within their group or allies of those groups, to gain advice, to gain perspective. And our action committees actually, they do a lot of work. Like for Asian Heritage Month, we had a bunch of action committee members do webinars, 10-minute webinars, snippets on language. So, South Asian lawyer would get up and commonly used phrases and do a little 10-minute bit. So that they are really engaged and plugged into the firm. And then the third pillar would be training. The most recent set of training that we did was unconscious bias training, and then followed by bystander intervention training. So the unconscious bias training, the self-reflection that we as lawyers don't like to have, we struggle against, but it's important and it's good. And then, when you see something, how do you intervene? When is it appropriate to intervene? And so that was a bystander intervention training piece. And I thought that was really important, not only from an internal perspective, but from an external perspective as well, right? Going about in your daily life, you can implement those tools. And as Hasson was mentioning, sometimes you have clients that you have to manage in those situations as well. So it gives our firm members some basis to figure out how to navigate those tricky situations.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I think I have the very last thing, and I'll just share that I already shared that I do daily huddles with my team. I just want to point out that it's not necessarily a natural thing to implement these things in the beginning. A couple of years ago, I was asked to start checking in and report out on morale for each of the team members, and a number between 1 and 4. How do you feel? 4 being highest, 1 being lowest. And I got so much pushback from those lawyers. They were like, what are you going to do if I'm not happy enough? What do if I'm not at 3 every day, then what happens? Who wants to know? And, really, I was like, this is my way of just having a temperature check on how the team is doing. It's shorthand for asking, hey, how you doing? If you're 1, I'm going to say, is there anything I can do to support you? If you're 4, I'm going to go, what's your secret? Because I want to be a 4.
Right.
But it is a challenge. And I ended up instituting well, tell me if you're a poo, Tigger, a Eeyore, or a Piglet today. And that seemed to work with that team. But just be intentional and keep at it, because it's important.
Thank all 3 of you so much. Do we have any questions? I know we're just about out of time, but if anybody's got any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Didn't have any in the chat or Q&A. Well, we do have, these were some of the articles referenced in our presentation today. If you want to screen grab this, we can send this out as well. But maybe question. Hold on. Oh, Christine just said thanks. Thanks for coming, Christine. We appreciate you.
We know we have at least one person.
Well, again, thanks everyone for attending. We really sincerely appreciate. We hope you got some good nuggets you can take back to your team today. Tamara, Hasson, Akira, thanks for sharing your vast knowledge and experience with all of us. And thanks again to Hasson's committee, Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, and the Law Practice Management Task Force for putting this on today. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Hey guys,
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.